Education Closet on Demand. I'm your host, Susan Riley, and the founder of EducationCloset.com. And today, I'm so excited because we just, we just finished up our winter online STEAM and Arts Integration Conference. And so if you don't know about this, we hold this twice a year, once in the winter, once in the summer. We just finished up our winter one on February 7th, and our summer one will be on July 23rd. So if you are interested, make sure you keep that in mind. We're going to be talking a lot about that as we get closer to summer. But for right now, the winter conference is completed, and you know it's a ton of work, but it's also so exciting to see educators from around the world gather together to talk about integrating the arts. And I mean, we had people from Turkey and Singapore and Australia and just Canada. It's just been an amazing experience. And one of the things I wanted to do with you today is to share one of our sessions that I was extremely excited about, and I think it's something that we can have a great conversation on. And it's a technique called the integrated SGO. And if you're not familiar with an SGO, it is a student growth objective. Some school districts call it a student learning objective, an SLO. Some people call it an SGG, student growth goal. Again, our acronyms in education. But essentially, it's writing a goal for yourself as a professional that takes a look at where students are and where you want them to get to by the end of their time with you. So a lot of school systems are using this as part of the teacher evaluation system. And so it's got a lot of people very nervous. And something that we found that was very helpful was to write one of these with another content area or with another arts area. And so in the conference, we did a whole session on how to write one of these. Why would you write an arts integrated SGO in the first place? How it takes the pressure off a little bit, and it really makes for a seamless experience for your students, but also as a way to gather some really great information about how your students learn, what are some techniques that they like to use, and how to get them to move farther, faster. The other thing about that presentation is that we have a great segment in there about questions your administrator is going to ask you and how to think about those in advance so that you're prepared when you walk into that meeting, because sometimes educators get really nervous about their administrator and whether or not it's going to be approved and what they're looking for. And so we have a section in that conference video about what questions you can anticipate. So today we're going to share that conference video with you. You're going to get to see me and my colleague Casey Smith, who is a math educator, and then Greg Paluski, who is a former assistant superintendent. And we're going to provide you with this training on how to do an integrated SGO. At the end, I would love to hear from you. Is this something that you would use? Are there questions that you have that we can answer in a later segment? Please comment below. Let us know. Let's continue that dialogue. And other than that, I hope you enjoy this conference session, complimentary from us at Education Closet, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on using the integrated SGO. Hi everybody, and welcome to our session on integrated SGOs. I'm Susan Riley.
I'm Casey Smith.
And we're here today to just kind of share with you a new approach that you might take to SGOs. Now, SGOs could be called a lot of different things. Some places call them SLOs. Yeah. Some people call them SGOs. Some people call them SGGs. Essentially, we're talking about student growth goals or student growth objectives. So for today's purposes, we're going to call it SGOs, but keep that in mind as you're working through yours, that your district might call it something different.
Exactly.
So today we're going to be looking at the process of integrating your SLO. So we've been talking a lot today about arts integration and STEAM integration. Today we're actually going to take a look at how do you integrate a student growth goal. And so one of the things that we want to get out of this today is to kind of talk about the benefits of why you would even approach this in an integrated way, how to do it so that it's reasonable for you and actionable, and also to kind of explore the conversations that you might have between two different content areas. And that's what we're really talking about today. My background is actually in music.
And my background is in elementary math.
So we're actually going to come at this from those two perspectives. We're going to combine these two content areas into a single SGO that we can work on together as a teacher in the building.
And those two content areas naturally go together anyway.
Exactly. So we're going to take a look at specifically fractions, because obviously in music we're taking a look at rhythms and the division of rhythms.
Right. And especially in grades 3, 4, and 5, it's a major work for Common Core for math, that foundation of fractions as they lead into middle school and higher level math. So it's a major work of the grades.
Exactly. So the first step is actually to have a collaborative conversation with someone. So I like Casey. So
we get along really well.
We do. We get along great.
We think the same way.
And she's somebody, if I was in a building, I would go to her all the time if I had a question about something in fractions or math that I really wanted to focus on in music. I'd go to Casey. And if Casey noticed that some of her students were more musically inclined,
right, and if they're happen to be struggling with some of those fraction concepts, I know I have a small background in music, and I know that that's a great way then to integrate and to reach those students to better understand those fraction concepts.
Right, so she'd come to me, and so we'd naturally have this kind of conversation anyway, and that's really where you want to start. Find somebody in your building that you like, and that you work really well with.
Makes it easier if you like each other.
That's right. And that you respect each other and have those conversations naturally. If you always go to lunch with somebody in the building and you're constantly having those conversations anyway, partner with them and think about a spot where you're seeing students struggle in both of your classes.
Right. Because really the other idea is the fact that these are our children, not just my children, and we are all kind of developing their education together.
Right. And so if we're looking for spots that students are struggling in both of our content areas, we can then go and dig into the standards we can figure out why are they struggling there and what standards are they really struggling with that might align.
Exactly.
So we can kind of take a look at those standards and find out if there's any natural alignments that we could explore together.
Right.
And then finally, really importantly in that conversation is that you identify one standard. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed.
Yes, especially with the math, because there are so many individual standards, but it's best to focus on one specifically. It makes it much easier for your data collection as well if you focus on that one standard.
Right, so you would select one standard from the math area or a different content area, and then one standard from the arts area. And when you identify those standards, you're being held to both. So I'm being held to both the math standard and the music standard. But because I'm teaching them hand in hand, I should be, because I'm working through both those, and you would be held to both as well. Exactly. In your classroom. Now, administrators go about that differently. Some people, when they do an integrated SGO, they're going to hold you accountable to the work that's done specifically in your classroom. Right. So you'd be held responsible to the math goal. I'd be held responsible to the music goal. It's really how your administrator approaches it, but keep in mind that one standard from both sides is really as much as you want to get into in an SGO.
Definitely.
All right, moving on into where we go next is interpreting or identifying what growth looks like. So what does that look like in music for me? So if we've identified fractions, and I really kind of want to focus on part to whole and what that looks like, how do I know that my students get it? Right? Essentially, that's where you're going with an SGO. And then,
right. And with math, you can certainly administer a small pre-assessment just to see where they are now. It could be, even a post-assessment. You've already taught the content, but these students are still struggling, and use that data as your indicator of, which target group you have. And then what would that growth look like using another piece of an assessment or a data point.
Right. So you want to be able to identify very clearly in your mind how do you know your students are going to be successful here? What does that look like for both of you? And how does the both sets of standards help the other? So if she's looking at fractions in third grade and specifically part to whole, and I'd be asking her, what does that look like for you? I can translate that into what that actually looks like for rhythmic values in my classroom. And vice versa.
Right.
So then we also have to think about how long is that going to take and be really thoughtful about that. Is this a 3-week thing? Is this a 12-week thing?
Right.
Let's be clear about that.
And I think sometimes it depends, especially on the curriculum that you have written from your district, how much time has been allotted specifically for that content standard. But if it is your SGO, you might go beyond that time outside through your music class.
Right.
So we might be done doing fractions in our classroom, but they continue throughout in music and possibly other content areas.
Exactly. And so thinking about that, what are the strategies that our students are going to be able to need to be successful in these standards that you've selected? So what math strategies are you using and how does that work? What does that look like? I know a lot of times you use stuff about manipulatives and having students work through that.
What's best is using like that, starting with that concrete and having those manipulatives, but then taking it to the representational stage, drawing out those notes in music, and then going to that abstract of maybe even hearing them. And the length of time with the fractional pieces. So definitely that works well through those strategies of the concrete, representational, abstract.
Right. And so being able to talk about that, like when she says concrete, representational, and abstract, I'm going, what? So like, huh? So for her to be able to tell me, okay, here's what that looks like for you, but also here's what that looks like in my classroom. So I understand what strategies she's using, and I might be able to explain to her what I'm doing in music class as well, so that we can use those strategies in tandem to make that even more powerful for our students. Mapping that out ahead of time is really important.
Yes.
And then from there, once you have the standards identified and where you want them to go, your two bookends, right? Your beginning and your end for your SGO, then you want to be able to think about, all right, how are we going to teach these two standards in a way that's going to get us from the beginning to the end? So thinking about the integration lessons that you could do in both classes to meet your target. And that's where we would work on those lessons together.
Definitely.
Yeah, and so then once we've outlined those lessons, and it could be one lesson, it could be 3 lessons.
Series of lessons,
absolutely.
Sure. Even something that might even take more project-based, like a week or so, that music could step in and help develop.
Absolutely. So that's really up to you. That's where the flexibility comes in, which is very nice. What's important, though, is when you do that and you have this kind of overarching map developed, is that you select some check-in dates for you both to kind of measure the progress of your students and to readjust, because you know things don't go as planned.
Not always, or maybe that student you thought would grasp it very quickly is still really struggling and they're just not there. So those check-in dates are really important to just kind of touch base with not just the lessons and the strategies, but the students specifically.
Exactly. All right, and so from there, then you just fill in your SGO format. You're drafting your SGO. You could create 2 separate ones. So Casey could develop one just for her, and I could develop one just for me, focused on those 2 standards. But again, then I would only be held accountable for my standard if you do it that way. Or you can develop a single SGO, which you then take to your administrator together.
Exactly. That would have both standards on it. One music, one math.
Yes. And so from that point, it's going to look something like this. This would be taking what we've just talked about. This is what your SGO would look like. And again, this is in your handout, so you can feel free to download it. But literally, we just plugged in everything we talked about, the standards we identified, what our goals are, what mastery level looks like, and then how we plan to get our students there. Once you've got that done, then you get to go schedule your administrator meeting. And at this point, your administrator is going to have some questions.
Absolutely. And that's their job, really, is to question you, to have you really think about your target, your standard, the strategies you have in place, what lessons you're going to do, the purpose of doing one together. So yeah, be prepared to answer some questions about your SGO.
And again, that's a great spot for you to go in together. Even if you have separate SGOs, but you're working in tandem towards that goal, this is a good time for you to go in together so you can talk about that with your administrator, talk about why you're doing it, where you see the benefit and what you hope to get out of it, both professionally and for your students. And then you're simply going to readjust. So Greg is actually going to step in at this point and talk about, here's some questions that you might consider that an administrator might ask you. So kind of to be prepared.
Right.
In an essence. So we're going to turn it over to Greg, and we'll be back with you in just a second.
So one of the things that we provided for you at Education Closet, both from a leadership perspective and both from a teacher perspective, are some critical questions that we think are going to help foster a deep, rich dialogue within not only the particular arts classroom, but with the administrator as well, that are focused on each component of the SLO. And, no one wants to have a gotcha moment. And I know that there's a lot of anxiety with teachers in having the dialogue and not know really what to expect. And we think that these actual critical questions are going to help lower your anxiety, help you be able to reflect on your practices and the SLO process, and be able to prepare yourself to walk in kind of armed, so to speak, with having thought through some of these critical questions. And I think also from the administrator perspective, remember that they're looking at it from a very big picture. How is each one of these conferences and the conversation I've been having with my teachers, how is that linked to the school improvement planning process? So what we've done is provided a resource that really breaks apart each one of those components. So when you're thinking about going into the conference, how does this arts goal connect to the school improvement plan? What data points have you looked at? Not only with your other arts colleagues, but with other teachers across the curriculum. What themes are kind of emerging? What kind of ahas are you having? What specifically the measuring points, the specific target that you're actually going to focus on? The interval of time. Why did you select that? What evidence have you collected to kind of measure, some kind of growth that has taken place or not? Specifically the instructional strategies that you've used to implement within the classroom, and as well as the professional development or support that you need in order to further the connection and closing those achievement gaps within your individual classroom. So there is a host of reflective questions there that I think are going to help our teachers prepare for that conference. And I think it's really going to help our administrators in thinking through the dialogue and questions. So we hope that you use those questions on both ways to prepare and to have richer, deeper dialogue about what students are learning, what they're not learning, and the progress that they're making or lack thereof, and what changes need to take place in order to put those students on the right trajectory.
Okay, so now that you've had your administrator meeting and you've gotten some
feedback,
think-abouts, some feedbacks, you're going to want to go and adjust your SGO and take into account their feedback and then resubmit it to your administrator with their suggestions put in there. And then stick to those check-in dates. Work through your plan.
Yeah. Even if for some reason you don't even feel that you're ready for that check-in date, you hadn't done that particular lesson, still meet, because there might be a reason that your other person could really help you out with, well, here's how you can get that started or get that done then in time for the next check-in date so that we're on track.
Exactly. And so then you're going to collect the data together. So you'll collect data. I would collect data from the music side, Casey would collect it from the math side, and then we'd take a look at it together and see if there are any trends that we can identify, see if there are things that we're noticing over time in both of our areas, both separately and together, and then assess the completed SGO. Once we're all complete, we're all finished, and we take it back to our administrator, we can have that conversation at the end of the year, right? So that is pretty much it. It is a very brief introduction to this kind of unique way of approaching an SGO. If you have any questions, you can always get in touch with us. These are our email addresses, but we're also going to be on the chat over on the left-hand side of your screen right now. So feel free to go plug those in. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, we enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I hope you enjoy doing a collaborative SGO with one of your counterparts in music or math or whatever subject it is that you teach.
Right, exactly. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.